So the phone that really caught my attention at MWC this year was the second generation Yota phone. People have questioned the need for two screens on a smartphone, but Yota phone have gone against the naysayers. They released the original two-screen Yota phone last year, but the second generation really looks to be an interesting proposition. It's got your normal smartphone screen on the front, but on the rear you find an e-ink display, one that you find on an e-reader. The second generation takes things further because that e-ink screen is fully touch enabled, and with a bigger battery inside too, it will actually last a decent amount of time and really allow you to get that benefit from the e-ink display. Now, in terms of a release date, it's set for sometime later this year, but for an exact time we're not sure, and the price is still unknown, but it's definitely one I'll be keeping a close eye on.
So the Huawei Ascend G6 takes a lot of its cues from the P6, but here it arrives at an affordable price, less than £200 it's going to be, but the big thing is that it's offering 4G connectivity and a really nice front-facing camera at 5 megapixels, so you'll be able to upload those shots very quickly using the higher speeds. Overall, it feels quite nice and robust in the hand, not too premium, but you wouldn't expect that for this phone. It also comes running Android 4.3 as well, which is actually quite nice to hear. A lot of the phones at MWC were still lagging behind with 4.2. So the Huawei Ascend G6 offering a nice front-facing camera and high data speeds for a pretty affordable price of sub £200.
When I first saw the Samsung Galaxy S5, I was underwhelmed. It looks like an incremental update from the S4, but once you dig down a little bit more, there's a lot more going on really. It's, design-wise it's fairly similar. It looks like a Note 3 combined with an S4, which isn't that exciting. But the back is actually quite good. The dimpled effect looks a bit weird, but in the hand it actually feels very solid. The whole thing is packaged really nicely. The screen's a bit bigger, it's more vibrant, it's clearer. And while you can lambast Samsung for not really doing much with it, what it has done is drill down to the bits that we really want. So that's a better camera, improved battery life, slightly more easy to use interface. And while this, a few of these things are going to come out in the full review, it does feel like Samsung said, right, let's ditch the gimmicks, let's get rid of all the innovation that says, you can now swipe without touching and things like that, and just got to the point of what people really want. They want a smartphone that works really quickly and takes good pictures without dying in an instant on battery. So while I think it's going to be a close one between which is better from the Z2 or the Samsung Galaxy S5, I think Samsung has just taken it simply because it's taken a really popular smartphone and honed it to a point that you can really actually use it more effectively.
So the LG G2 Mini is an interesting one because it feels kind of quite late to the Mini game. We've already got the S4 Mini out there and the HTC One Mini as well. But it is quite a nice phone. I mean, having played with it, its 4.7-inch screen's quite nice. I mean, it's running Android 4.4 KitKat, which a lot of phones at MWC weren't this year. It has got quite a nice feel to it. It's not actually that small though, despite its Mini name. It also has the rear keys found on the LG G2, but here they actually feel a little more comfortable, a bit better placed on the slightly smaller frame.
The G Pro 2 is LG's answer to the phablet smartphone race. We had the G Pro last year, so it was only natural that the Korean firm would come and bring the G Pro 2 along to MWC this year. It's got a slightly bigger screen, it's got a more high-def display, it's got a decent camera around the back, but the biggest change is LG's Android overlay. The G2 launched last year with knock-on, allowing you to double tap the screen to wake the phone, but you'd still have to input your PIN or your pattern after you've done that. The G Pro 2 eradicates that need by allowing you to knock out a pattern even when the screen's off and taking you straight into your home screen, avoiding any of that clumsy unlocking procedure. It's a nice feature. It didn't work particularly well in the models that I got to play with, but hopefully that's sort of a software bug in the early software that the phones were running, and it'll be a lot smoother when it comes to market later on this year. Will it break out of Asia? Well, it might not. The G Pro never really got legs in the markets towards the Western world, but there is a bigger appetite for phablets these days, so the G Pro 2 could well branch out further.
The Sony Xperia M2 is definitely Sony's new attack on the middle of the market. The point where you don't spend a huge amount on a flagship, but you're still getting a good bang for your buck. The mid-range smartphone market is quite a weird one. A couple of years ago I would have said that it doesn't really exist. It's just overpriced smartphones that aren't cheap and they're not the really high-end flagship models, so who would really want it? But we've seen more of an appetite for these devices that now sit in the middle range of the price brackets. And that's because manufacturers are starting to realise you can actually put some decent specs in there and not really truncate the performance in some way. So we've had the HTC One Mini, the Samsung Galaxy S4 Mini. Now with the M2, it's slightly taking a slightly different tack in the fact that it's a lesser version of the Sony Xperia Z2. It's not waterproof, it shares a lot of design aesthetic, and it's just a decent device. It kind of hits the marks, QHD screen rather than Full HD. And while it might not be the sort of the phone that you aspire to, you might want the kind of the best, the top end. If you haven't got that much cash, you don't really want to spend loads on a phone that you might break, this is actually quite a decent device. It's got all the best of Sony, it's got a lot of the great camera features. Again, it follows the design aesthetic. And I think, it's not going to be the most inspiring device, but I think having things like the M2 really does help the smartphone market.
So the Nokia XL is a really interesting handset. It comes as a trio as part of the Nokia X, X Plus and XL. It's the largest handset in that trio of Nokia handsets running, wait for it, Android. Now, it's not the Android that you and me know and love. It's a very heavily modified Android, which actually looks more like Windows Phone. But at the base level, it means you get some of the Google Play apps that you don't get on Windows Phone devices. You don't get all of them because Nokia's got its own store on it, but it's for its low price of €109 and a 5-inch display. It's really hard to knock the XL.
The Xperia Z2 was a phone that we didn't really expect given we'd seen the Z1 just 6 months ago. But what it does do is it takes all the best from that device and makes it a lot better. So it basically got the same kind of chassis, which has been refined a little bit, a slightly larger screen, and a much better display in terms of the live colour LEDs, which make a real difference to the reds and the greens and help make it feel like a much more sort of lively and vibrant display. On top of that, it's still waterproof, it's really fast with an 801 Qualcomm processor. It's basically everything we're looking for in a smartphone, and it's packaged in a way that Sony's done quite nicely. So I think, if you're a Sony fan, this is definitely the best smartphone that you can get, and it's got loads of great Sony tech in there as well. In terms of changes from the Z1, there's not a lot really there. 4K is the big change, and I don't think that's really something that people necessarily care about right now. We don't have a lot of 4K displays, so being able to shoot in Ultra HD isn't really that much of an attractive feature. However, it does mean that you can zoom in on the action and get some still full HD pictures, even though you're getting quite a sort of truncated part of the display. So I think Sony's done quite well with what it's got on there, but it's quite an incremental upgrade on what we had with the Z1. So really it's just taking everything from that and making it more polished, more refined, and just a better smartphone.
So the HTC Desire 816 is a nice phone, and with its 5.5-inch screen, it's well propositioned for people who find the HTC One Max a bit too big and cumbersome. It's also got an interesting plastic kind of glossy finish to it, which sort of set alarm bells ringing for me, but having tried it, I actually quite like it. It's got quite a premium, robust feel to it. A little bit like the iPhone 5C actually in its curves and design and colour, which I think a lot of people will find appealing. It's also quite powerful as well, with a 1.6 GHz processor and 1.5 gig of RAM. You've got some beefy specs to match the beefy size too. Also interesting to see HTC has removed the capacitive buttons. They've been moved onto the screen now. And that's interesting because it sort of sends a little bit of a hint of where HTC is probably going with the all-new HTC One, which we'll be announcing this month. So all in all, it's a nice phone, the HTC Desire 816, a good phablet for those who aren't looking to go too big like the HTC One Max, and actually has a surprisingly premium feel to it.
So ZTE is one of those funny manufacturers like Huawei, which is known in the likes of the UK and the US and Australia as more of a budget smartphone manufacturer, but it's rocked up at MWC this year with the Grand Memo 2, its next generation of phablet, and it's not too bad to be honest. I got hands-on with it. It was relatively light, it was quite slim, it had a relatively nice camera. It did feel very cheap though. The overly plastic build was noticeable as soon as I picked it up, and it just sort of hammered home that sort of sub-premium quality that we've come to sort of expect from ZTE. ZTE does have the opportunity to make more premium phones, and I was promised by one of their executives while at MWC that there's more to come from the firm this year, and we will see a flagship device later on in 2014. But for now, the Grand Memo 2 is sort of a mid-range phablet. If you're looking for a large screen but at a lower cost, it may be one to look at.